Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Field Notes. My name is Phil Barber. I'm an ecologist in Homer, Alaska, and the Field Notes regional rep for the Alaska Soil Survey region. As a regional representative, I serve on the Field Notes Review Committee, which solicits and selects topics for each webinar. Today, we have selected one exciting topic, but first, we have to go over a few housekeeping items. This is a Microsoft Live event, not a Teams meeting, which means you are joining today's webinar in listen-only mode. We encourage you to ask questions at any time using the Q&A panel. The panel should open by default, but if for some reason it's not open, simply click on the question mark icon located on the upper right side of your screen. For closed captions, you can turn on the live caption button located in the lower right. Today's session is being recorded. Recorded sessions are available on the Field Notes Microsoft Teams channel and also on the Soil and Plant Science Division's YouTube channel. Dave Hoover is unfortunately not with us today, so I will be introducing our presenter for today. So continuing with this year's Field Notes tie-in with the 2023 Soils Planner, Jay Skovlin is with us today to share his tough dig experiences in the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Western Alaska. I personally have been enjoying these tough dig talks. I feel like they bring a little more life and background to the calendar that I see next to my desk every day. Looking towards 2024, if you glance to the right side of this screen, you'll get a first look at next year's planner cover page. The theme will be Back to Basics 2024. This next planner will actually be our 25th anniversary planner. You'll see the first one from 1999 in the lower center there. So we're 25 years into these planners now. They are printed or nearly so. Ordering is a little behind due to the new soil taxonomy key just coming out. So keep an eye and ear open for the opportunity to get your hands on one of the new planners. I also want to add a quick reminder that our next Field Notes webinar will take place on November 14th. Be on the lookout for an email reminder, and I hope that you will all join us. With that, I'd like to formally introduce Jay Skovlin, MLRA Soil Survey Leader, here to take us on a soil landscape traverse through the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. Take it away, Jay.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for that introduction. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody today. And thanks for the good work that you guys are doing and putting these Field Notes webinars together. I think they're a great way to share our experiences together. So let me share my screen here. Presentation up. We looking okay there?
Yeah, that's great, Jay.
Okay. All right, so I'd like to talk to you today about some perspectives that we've gained from working on a soil survey in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. I wanted to start with just talking about my perspective on why what we do is important. And when I first went to college, I thought I would go into business and be a business major. And I had this accounting course that was 3 days a week from 8:30 to 10 a.m. And we were, crunching numbers, but I soon found that, I liked numbers, but I didn't like crunching them in accounting. I liked the numbers to have more purpose and more purpose in terms of something that was interesting that I enjoyed thinking about. And so accounting was a difficult course for me, that's for sure. And I started looking at majors to transfer to, and I was sort of fighting my instincts going into business anyhow. I mean, as a kid, I had been, a kid that collected rocks and insects and bones and just kind of anything related to the natural world. And so when I came onto soils and soil science as a major, it just really felt like a home for me because, it really gave me an excuse to be a generalist in the natural resource disciplines. The soil touches everything, right? It touches the ecology, it touches water, the air, geology, everything. So it's kind of the great integrator, and gives you a reason to kind of understand all these different systems. And I think that perspective, the perspective that we have as folks that do soil inventory, work on soil survey, our soil scientists, that perspective of seeing a landscape and seeing that tapestry of components, of soil components and soil properties as they're distributed on a landscape, that is a really unique perspective to have. And, we're a small group of individuals, nationwide, worldwide, right? And I really feel that it's important that we need to share that perspective of how we see the world through the soil and how we see natural resources through soil, and that distribution of soil properties. So where is the Bob Marshall? The Bob Marshall is in northwest Montana. Before it was ever known as the Bob Marshall, it was a mountainous terrain in the Northern Rockies that was traversed by the Salish and Kalispel people to get from the Flathead Valley on the west side out to the plains to hunt buffalo. And so it has a long history of use by Native Americans. It's important to recognize that. The wilderness complex, as we know today, is comprised of three different major wilderness areas: the Bob Marshall Wilderness, the Great Bear Wilderness to the north, and the Scapegoat Wilderness, which lies to the south. And then for our mapping area, we also included a small chunk of the eastern portion of the Mission Mountains Wilderness in our mapping area. So who was this character, Bob Marshall? Well, he grew up out east. He gained a love of mountaineering and traversing a lot of country. He had a real hunger to see country. He came out west and he started exploring the mountain areas of the west. And he was a really intrepid guy. He would hike. He's known to have hiked, up to 50 miles a day. Commonly hiked over 30 miles a day for day hikes, these monster day hikes. And he would cross the Bob Marshall in 2 days, kind of patrolling, through the area. Just really grew to love wildlands and wild places and wanted to protect them. And he was a founding member and supporter of the Wilderness Society and had other positions of advocacy. Unfortunately, he died at age 38 of a heart attack in 1939. And the wilderness system really would not be what it is today without his advocacy. But had he lived longer to be able to advocate longer, it might look different than it does today as well. His trademark saying was, "Gee, this is swell." So he was really sound like a fun guy to hang out with, quite the character. So this was a cooperative project with the Forest Service. So the Northwest region, we had support of the Digital Soil Mapping Team, the Geospatial Technology and Applications Center, GTAC, with the Forest Service also supplied a lot of support for us. We worked closely with Region 1, the Forest Service, and the regional soil scientist, Vince Archer, who was very instrumental in being a liaison for the project. And then, of course, all the forest districts that actually manage the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, and those are the Flathead, the Lolo, the Helena, and the Rocky Mountain Ranger districts. We had great support from them. So people, we really couldn't do this without a lot of great people, a really solid crew that was dedicated to, the effort that is required to get out to these places, to work in them safely, to be prepared to do the work in a wilderness type setting. And we're fortunate to really have a phenomenal group of staff, from the Missoula office, from the Dillon office, from other folks that we pulled in. Just a really great group of folks. So I wanted to thank everybody that worked on the project, that helped us in the field or in other ways. Just incredibly important to thank them. One of the things that I really liked, I always liked sort of embarking on the trip, because these trips, to get in and sample, they require so much in the way of logistics to prepare and design the trips. And it's really, it was always a nice feeling to get to the trailhead and just be there and be like, okay, we're going, like if we don't have it, we don't need it, and get into the hiking mindset and just being in the wilderness and putting my field brain on to where I could just really be in that zone. Was always a good feeling the first day of the trip. We had a lot of great support from the Forest Service. We had the use of their ranger cabin facilities and ranger stations. This was really nice for food storage. We have bears in the Northern Rockies, grizzly bears, black bears, wolves. There's a lot of critters out there. So food storage is a really kind of a paramount thing you need to be real safe about doing. And so that was always nice to have these facilities to use. We would camp on our own, but we would also have facilities at points along the way. And we also had communication support through their lookout system with the radio, and we'd have radio check-ins daily at the start of the day and then at the end of the day with the lookouts. So that was always a comfort to have that support system. And, in terms of safety, Dr. Limbo, I think in the last SBSD call, said something like safety begins with all of us, right? Well, what that means to me, when I think about that, is sort of the situational awareness of being out in a place like this. It's really important that your observation bubble is out in front of you, is always out, much beyond where your person is. And so if you're walking on a trail and you're tired at the end of the day, just take a break and get something to eat, get refocused so that you're not zoning out on the trail, because as soon as you zone out on the trail and you're tired, you're going to come around a trail corner into a critter or something is going to happen. And so it's always, sort of avoiding these safety or getting yourself into an emergency type situation is always a series of misjudgments or a series of wrong steps in your judgment calls. And so it's always about preempting that and being aware of what is happening around you, and getting kind of staying ahead of that. And so we always also, I would monitor kind of the energy levels of the crew. We don't push it out there. We don't climb to the top of the mountain every day because we don't all have the energy. And you're only going to cover so much country, and you've got to kind of feel out, how people are feeling, and alternate short days of hiking with longer days of hiking, and take a measured approach to it. We want to get out and we want to look at areas, but we don't want to kill ourselves either. Okay, so that was just a little side note on safety. This person, Monica, on our crew, she had worked with John Craighead, the wildlife biologist, on a crew of his, and he liked to call what they did with their wildlife sampling adventure with a purpose, and that's sort of that definitely rang with me when I heard that, because that's sort of what this is. It's adventure. It's exploring these terrains, and it's bringing back some great data. That's what it's all about. We had pack support for these trips. You really can't cover these kinds of distances without pack support. It's just critical. You would just wear yourself out if you had to be self-supported on these trips. And so the packers, we hired an outfitter, and Tom Parker was the lead on that, and his crew, Colton and Johnny, and they would pack us in from the trailhead and get us to where we needed to be, and move camp for us periodically, and then pack us out. And it was just a really great way to have that support. Really good to have that support. One of the things that I like to do is to really lean on the past work that's been done. And when we think about what we're involved in here with this endeavor of soil survey, it's been going on a long time, right? It's been going on over 100 years. There's a lot of work. There's been a lot of field work. People out there studying the landscape, writing about it, making maps of it. And we need to learn from all the work that's been done out there. And so that starts with geology maps. It starts with LSIs, land system inventories, so early soil surveys, other kinds of soil resource manuscripts, with soil surveys, block diagrams. All these kinds of things really help kind of give us context to what we're looking at. So I always try to soak up as much of this as I can. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to track down retired soil scientists that have worked in my office area. And it's always interesting, over a cup of coffee, you'll talk to them and they can give you this 5-10 minute download of the landscape relationships for an area that they've worked in. And that's always a real delight to kind of take those little nuggets in from them. And, I hope when I'm retired someday, somebody will call me up and chat me up about it, and I can be a resource to them. And they certainly enjoy chatting about it. So look them up if you haven't. So what we're going to do today is I'd like to take you on a soil landscape traverse along a geologic cross section. So we go back to this map by Mudge and Earhart from 1991, and they have this beautiful cross section right through the middle of the Bob Marshall on that map. And we're going to start on the west side, and we're going to move to the east side and sort of look at some, kind of visualize the landscapes through that cross section as we go. So the geologic setting, when we start on the west side, the west side of the Bob Marshall is comprised of this thick stack of really old metasedimentary rocks called the belt supergroup. And the belt supergroup is billion-year-old sedimentary rocks that have been buried and then re-exhumed. And so they're very hard, siltites, argillites, some muddy limestones, really interesting rocks. And that's the unit of rocks that basically comprises Glacier National Park to the north. As you move to the east, you get into Cambrian and Devonian limestones, and this area is has a really prominent landscape feature called the Chinese Wall, and that runs north and south along the Continental Divide, and that's a Cambrian limestone primarily. As we move to the east a little further, we get into Cretaceous shales and the valley of the Sun River. And then as we go out beyond that, we get to another section that has a real different character that is Mississippian and younger Jurassic limestones that tend to be kind of more calcareous, more hot limestones. And they're all tipped up into the formations that sort of make the Rocky Mountain front look the way it does. And they have some shales interbedded between these limestone units. But the overall kind of story here is that we had compression on the continent, which, so in this case, in the Bob Marshall, we had older rocks that were thrust over younger rocks. And so you have this sort of tipped up topsy-turvy situation due to the compressional forces. So a very interesting cross-section for sure, and a very interesting landscape resulting from that. One of the influences we have in addition to that is more recent addition of the ice extent that happened during the last glacial maximum. And so around 20 to 26,000 years ago was the peak of that glacial maximum. And Bill Locke did a paper that looked at the extent of what he thought the ice would be and tried to model the extent of what the ice would be over the Bob Marshall area. And when we look at that, there were really massive lobes of ice that ran out onto the plains in sort of these Piedmont lobes, where they would run out onto the plains, be unconfined by the mountains, and spread out in these Piedmont lobes. And in order to have that much ice running out onto the plains, we really needed a core of ice that was sitting right over the Bob Marshall as an ice cap. And that ice was fed partially by the continental ice coming down out of Canada, but also just partially as its own ice cap centered over the high country of the Bob Marshall. So a lot of till influences, paramaterial influences on the Bob Marshall area in general. So we're going to move through this cross section, and we're going to move from west to east, and we're leaving what's called Holland Lake on the west side out of the Sealy Swan Valley, and we're going over the Swan Range and over Gordon's Pass, and these are some of the metasedimentary belt group rocks, argillites, siltites, fairly thinly bedded materials. So as we go over Gordon's Pass, we get into kind of these cirque areas on the other side. And we have one of the things that we have in there is ash cap soils. We have volcanic ash, which is coming from Crater Lake, Oregon, from the Mount Mazama volcano, an eruption about 6,700 years ago. And that was a kind of a catastrophic eruption where all that ejected material was blown out to the north and east across Oregon and Washington and Idaho and Montana into Montana. And we're kind of at the far end of it where that ash landed, but it capped a lot of the soils and remains in position on the soils in a lot of the higher elevation areas. You can see the bright colors. Typically, these are a lot lower in fragments over a till material, which is a much different color and higher in fragments. In Glacier National Park, we found this sort of same gradient where we had a lot of ash on the west side of the park, and then it was sort of diminished on the east side as you go over the divide. The divide has a lot of, creates a lot of weather and a lot of strong downsloping winds. And so I think that those winds tend to just sort of take that, they took that ash off of the landscape in a lot of places. And so there's pockets on the east side, but it's much more continuous on the west side. As we go down the drainages, Gordon's Creek, Young's Creek, into these areas, we see we're getting into some of the fire mosaics that occur in the Bob Marshall. And these are there's massive areas of fire. There's a fire atlas, which shows sort of this patchwork of burns, really large burns, like whole drainage burns of hundreds of thousands of acres, where these fires have grown together and really covered a lot of the country in there. The fires are typically just let them burn when they start in there. Try to protect some of the facilities and the structures, but that's about all they try to do. Oops. As we go further into the Bob, we're getting into the South Fork of the Flathead River country. And this is just a beautiful river. This South Fork flows north into the Middle Fork and the North Fork, and to make the main stem of the Flathead, and just a beautiful broad valley with a lot of fluvial features, a lot of big outwash terrace features, also benches, glacial benches in there. Just a phenomenal river to see. Very beautiful. And as you go up in the South Fork, you get into sort of the headwaters basins. And some of these basins, like Basin Creek, the Basin Creek area, have really large alluvial flats, alluvial fans that come into them. There's also, as the ice retracted to the north and melted out of these valleys, there was impoundment of the drainage that was flowing to the north. And so a lot of these basins have some evidence of a lake bed or an impoundment in them. And so on the margins of the basins, we would find soils with, silty varving and lake sediments at depth in some of these soils and on some of these benches. So that was a very interesting find to kind of start to think about how that glacial impoundment affected some of these basins. As you go further up to sort of the headwaters of the South Fork, you get into what's called the Danaher. And the Danaher Basin still really has a very large wetland complex in it. That's sort of the remnants of a lake that would have been in there. And there's also lake bed sediments on benches around the margins of that basin as well. Very beautiful area. And some echoes of Bob Marshall here. One of the things that I really enjoyed doing was just getting out of camp kind of in the evening. I would take a walk and try to get out to a point where I could look over the landscape, see it in the late light of day, and see, some of the terracing and the benching. This is in the Danaher, and you could see the wetland complex, the shrubs, the willows, kind of willow complex through here. And also to get up on the high points, right? The high points really give you a perspective. And, we're never going to get the chance to dig everything out here. Like we're really just passing through the country very quickly, and very big chunks of country quickly. And so we're only going to get so much. And so what we're lacking in sample size, we need to gain in context. And however you do that, if you get to a high point, you look around, you look at the landscape in low light, you take a walk to a specific area to try to understand what these benches are, or how they're put together, understanding that soil geomorphology, the geomorphic context. It all helps you put your observations in context and make the most of that small sample size that you're gathering. So it's just the way we tried to do it out there. It's a challenge. So as you come into the heart of the Bob Marshall, you get to the Chinese Wall, and this is a really difficult area to get to. Beautiful escarpment that runs about 30 miles. Really tall cliffs in there, and of Cambrian limestone. And we had hiked about 15 miles from the east side, from the Sun River up to the wall, and we camped up near the wall with stock. And you can only camp within a certain distance of the wall. You can't camp right under the wall because it's really hard to have stock up there. It's a pretty fragile environment, and they try to keep it protected. And so you have to camp a certain ways away. So that day that we had up there, we had planned to have about 2 days kind of along the wall. And we went up and we sampled some areas below the wall here. And then we hiked over along the wall, and we're going to drop down to another camp that was in a different drainage. And we got to that campsite, and there was no water. It was a particularly dry year. There was no water, and there was no feed for the stock there. And so we had to make a decision on the fly, and we decided that we would just hike down about 13 miles to where we could camp lower in the drainage where the stock could get water and be in a better spot. And so, we really only had a day at the wall, and that's kind of how this is, right? It's like a moonshot. You're there, and you just have a little bit of time to explore the place. And with hiking on each end of that day, we really kind of had like about a half day to work in there and just dig what we could and look at what we could. And really interesting kind of lithic soils in there on that limestone material. It's a very foliated limestone. And, right up against the wall, there were some kind of cirque type areas that were closed depressions and some interesting ash soils in there, like a water-laid ash material in there with some layering, and then organics over the top of that. So, fascinating soils. I would have loved to have poked around up there a few more days, but we just didn't have the chance. And that's how it goes. You got to roll with it. As we go down into the Cretaceous areas, we're getting into the North Fork of the Sun River Basin. And this is a really beautiful area, much more grassy than the western side of the Bob. These are Cretaceous shales in here, and so they tend to weather to a clay. So much more clay soils on this side, a lot of argillics, fine silty soils through here, very dark, rich in organic matter, tough digging, but a beautiful, beautiful place to work for sure. Here we are kind of moving up onto the flank of the Sun River Basin. This was up towards Lookout, called Bear Top Lookout. And we had a beautiful day up there, very clear skies that day, but you can see the smoke on the horizon that was rolling in from the south and the west, from fires in Oregon and maybe even California, I think, at that time. And that smoke rolled in, and we kind of smoked out the views for the rest of our trip until the last day when we walked out. So that kind of stuff happens to you too. So I was glad we got up and you got a view of this when we had the chance. And then this is coming out over the Rocky Mountain front. We have a lot of tipped up layers of younger limestone material, a lot of lithic soils, carbonates at the surface, calcium loving vegetation species, or at least tolerant vegetation species, coming over Route Creek Pass and on our way through the Rocky Mountain front. So just to recap, some insights from fieldwork in the Bob Marshall. We had a distribution of volcanic ash cap soils, mostly on the west side, but they also extended into the Sun River Basin and across the Continental Divide. We had some interesting finds in the lacustrine sediments in the margins of the Big Prairie, Basin Creek, and Danaher areas. And then we had some real fine family clay soils on the Cretaceous shales in the Sun River Basin and along the Sun River. So I hope you've enjoyed this visual walk across the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and thanks for listening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you for taking us across the Bob Marshall with you. Just absolutely stunning photos. I'd like to ask folks to please get your questions in for Jay now. We can we'll go through them as they come in. I feel like you and I had similar educational experiences. Mine was not accounting, but thermodynamics for aerospace engineering, and that 8 a.m. class just burnt me out pretty quick. And so, got that quick switch to ecology, and here I am enjoying every minute of it. So we have some questions coming in. First one is, how did active wildfires impact your sampling efforts?
Yeah, so we did have to cancel. We at least canceled one trip. We had a trip scheduled, I think, in 2021, and there was a fire that was right near that area. And the Forest Service is very cautious about sending their people, or anything related to their folks into areas when there's an active burn going. And so we ultimately, that burn was sort of a drainage over from where we were going to be, but it was definitely growing in size, and we opted to cancel the trip and reschedule. So yeah, that stuff definitely happens. The other thing that you really have to watch out in those burn areas is if the wind comes up, you can get some really nasty, deadfall that will fall and get tipped over, and so there's just all kinds of hazards related to that. But that's one example.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. A follow-up to that. Did you sample like similar landforms for unburned and post-burn areas to try to see, how soils might change, or to try to build out your state and transition models for those natural disturbances?
I wouldn't say that we were like necessarily always targeted on pairing those like a burned unburned situation, but over the course of our total sampling, we definitely did have places where we were, we'd be in a burn, and we look at the soils, and then we'd be in a native veg situation. So it was, always interesting to kind of compare the two, for sure.
Very cool. We have one here. What is your favorite geologic formation you ran across?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
What is the favorite geologic formation that you came across?
Oh boy. Let's see. I think the wall feature was really the most spectacular. And anybody that tells you, that has been to the Bob Marshall, that's the question they always ask you. Oh, have you been to the wall? Have you seen the wall? And it's just a focal point of it's sort of the crown jewel of the whole thing. And it is just a really massive feature. As you approach it, you see it from miles away, and it's just stunning when you get up to it, and it's amazing. The clouds sort of like come over the thing, come over that divide, and it's just making its own weather all the time. It's really, really fascinating to see.
Oh, so cool. Um, how many days in a row did you camp out in the wilderness for field work?
So our trips tended to be kind of on an 8 to 10 day length, and that just seemed to be, longer than 10 days. You're kind of getting tired out there, and shorter than 8 days was almost like too short logistically, because you kind of have a day to get in, a day to get out, and you don't have that many days to work in there. And so we sort of danced around that 8 to 10 day length. Seemed to work for us.
Cool. And I'm assuming you guys gave yourselves a little break in between those 8 to 10 days just to kind of regather yourselves.
Yeah, we would. And it was sort of up to the individuals too. I mean, some people, would be like, yeah, I need a break,
Yeah.
and then others that day might feel okay to go out. And so we would sort of monitor that and just work on it, as needed. We just didn't want to burn people out, because you're putting
Yeah,
out
definitely.
a lot of energy when you're out there, and
Yeah,
you just
that
have to
self-care
pace
is
yourself.
important.
Yep.
Um, we'll give a couple more moments for any further questions. So is the Bob Marshall complete now?
So we released a part of it this year, the western half, kind of the South Fork portion of it, as a vector Sergo
Nice.
product, and we'll release the other half next year. And then it was decided basically by the region that they wanted to deliver a vector product first, and then we'll be doing some digital soil mapping products, a raster product down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to go. The products are sort of different, and it's nice to have both the vector and the raster products for the area. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think they're, I mean, obviously different deliverables with different uses. I
yeah,
don't see any further questions coming in. I personally could talk to you for the remaining of the hour, but maybe we will wrap things up and let you go. I just want to thank you, Jay, so much for presenting for us today. I really enjoy seeing um, these types of presentations that get us out to different parts that, unless you're on a detail or unless, you're habitually moving, these, I don't know if I'd ever go to the Bob. So I want to thank you for your time and your presentation. If anyone has any follow-up questions for Jay, you can reach him at his email or at his office there in Missoula. I think that'll wrap us up for today. Thank you so much.
thanks everybody. Thanks for tuning in.